Hey guys, it's Nicole and welcome back to another video. Today I have my June wrap up for you. I'm so sorry this is late. Things have kind of been hectic, but it's here, so yay. This book I managed to complete in June was After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was a buddy read with Kerry from Kerry Reads, so she'll be linked down below. She's so sweet and I highly recommend that you check her out. With Taylor Jenkins Reid, I've read Daisy Jones, I've read Evelyn Hugo, I've read Maybe in Another Life, I've read Forever Interrupted. So this was my 5th Taylor Jenkins Reid book and I really enjoyed it. This book follows a married couple who are 30 years old and they've kind of run into a dry spot in their marriage, so they decide to take a 1-year break, and in this 1 year they are allowed to see other people and they are not allowed to contact one another. The first 60 to 70 pages of this book, I was convinced this book was not for me. I just did not like it, but there was a real shift in tone. Loved how this book talked about family and relationships. Everyone has their own dynamics and their own kind of definition. There was a conversation Lauren had with her sister Rachel in this, and Rachel is someone who is very career driven, and although she would really like to find someone and settle down, she doesn't feel like she's going to live a lesser life if that doesn't happen. And I just really appreciate that being in here. It talked a lot about the expectations we have on ourselves, the expectations we have on our relationships, and the reality and how relationships are work and take a lot of work, and that often it's worth it. So I love that this book started off being about Lauren's relationship with her husband, but it ended up being about all the relationships in her life, and it was really delightful. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I highly recommend this. It was a really easy, quick, light read. The next book I read was a reread, and that was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I read this a year and a half ago, maybe longer. It's been a while, and that's why I reread it, because I never continued on with Muse of Nightmares, so I wanted to refresh myself. When I first read it, I did enjoy the book, but I gave it 4 stars. I really got annoyed by the romance. It was very instant lovey, but it was one of those books I finished and I honestly could not stop thinking about it for months. I really love how Laini Taylor takes the time to craft the world and how lush her words and descriptions are. It's just absolutely incredible, and it honestly felt like her own self-made fairy tale. It was just beautiful. So I was thinking about changing my rating to a 5-star, and this reread definitely confirmed that this is a 5-star book for me. It definitely has its flaws, but the impression that it leaves on me, I just can't help but to give it 5 stars. This book is extremely popular on BookTube, and I'm sure you know what it's about, but if you don't, I'll give you a quick synopsis. This book follows Laszlo Strange, who is a boy who's kind of always living in his head and really obsessed with the mystical. His biggest obsession is with this lost city known as Weep, and one day he gets the opportunity to venture to this city, and the story kind of goes from there. I really highly recommend going into this not knowing much. What I love about this series is you really don't know where the story is going to take you, and you think you know at some points, but then you just constantly are getting surprised. I will say the 2 things I didn't like about this book was the romance. It was very instant lovey. I forgave it this time around because I was expecting it, and it really does have that fairy tale feel, and I feel like fairy tales, they do just have that instant love in them. What really did bother me though was as soon as the 2 love interests met, the side characters were dropped from the story, and yeah, that really annoyed me, and that happens about halfway through and then just not in the story. Having said that, I really love this book. It's just so magical, so lush, so enchanting. I then continued on to read Muse of Nightmares. I really love this, and I buddy read this with Jasmine from Lamordo Books. Please check her out if you haven't found her channel already. She's so lovely and one of the easiest people to talk to, and it was so much fun buddy reading this with her and freaking out about all the twists. I really love this. This was a fantastic conclusion. It was a little bit open-ended, so I kind of wish that we would get another book one day, maybe. I really enjoyed the character development in this, particularly the character Mina. I thought she was so interesting. She's one of the most unique and fascinating characters I've ever read about. I really enjoyed reading about her character. I really loved how we got to learn more about the magic in this world and how it works, and we got to learn about the history. And I just love how Laini Taylor tells a story. It's really done in a layered kind of way. It's like peeling back the layers and you just don't know what's at the bottom. Like, that's the best way I can describe it. It just completely went in a direction that I did not see. I love that we got so many interactions in this second book from the side characters, because like I said, I felt like in Strange the Dreamer a lot of the side characters were dropped, but in this book they were present and we got to see a lot of characters meeting and a lot of different interactions, and that was really fun. I think Laini Taylor is very good at giving side characters depth. My one critique would be that the pacing is a little weird. This whole book takes place in one day and it just doesn't feel like a day. It honestly felt like weeks, or a week at least. But overall, I really enjoyed this and I gave it 5 stars. I think Jasmine gave it 4 stars. I managed to complete in June was Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan. I actually picked this up on the very last day of April and I didn't finish it until the beginning of June, so it took me over a month to read this book. This book follows Nadia, and she has been raised her entire life in this monastery because she has the ability to speak to the gods. And in this world there are people who can speak to the gods, but she is special because she can speak to all the gods and she's also able to harness their powers. At the beginning of the story, the monastery she grew up in is being infiltrated by a prince who's from an opposing country, and a country that Nadia's people is at war with. So Nadia has to flee the monastery and she's then on the run. She then runs into another character, I think you pronounce his name as Malachias, and he is also from this opposing country, but he's actually working against that country. And him and Nadia pair up and they basically come up with a plan of their own to infiltrate this kingdom that Nadia's people is at war with. I had so many issues. It was really jarring just the way the whole story started. It was like a couple pages of Nadia being in the monastery and then she fled, and you're told it's like the place she was raised and like kept sanctuary in her entire life, but she had no attachment to that place or really the people. Like, it just was moved on so quickly. I didn't like how quickly these characters came to trust one another, especially when they're at war. Even the way the prince like stormed in from the beginning, I wanted to know how he finally found her. She'd been in the monastery for a really long time. Why did it take him and his countrymen so long to find her? And I wanted to know how he found her. There was just a real lack of context to this. So hard to remember a lot of the side characters because of how irrelevant and underdeveloped they were. That was my overall problem with this book. It was overall very underdeveloped, the entire story, and it felt a lot more like a skeleton of the book, and I was missing like the meat and the flesh. It just wasn't there. I think we should have gotten a lot more explanation on the history. I also found the magic to be a little confusing. I didn't understand the set rules and the limitations of the magic. The ending was so confusing. I don't even know what went on, and I'm pretty sure that's a pretty popular opinion. Like, even people who enjoyed this book didn't get the ending. My main issue was just how quick Nadia trusted everyone and how quickly she just fell in love. It was ridiculous. Found the plot and just what was going on in general really difficult to grasp because everything was so skimmed over. There was one point in the book where the characters were traveling from like one country or one point to another, and them traveling literally happened in 2 pages. Like, I was expecting more time to be given to develop the world and the story and the history, and it just wasn't there, and unfortunately it needed to be. This was pretty disappointing. I ended up giving it 2.25 stars. The next book I completed was Graevale by Lynette Noni. This is a YA series. This is the 4th book? Yeah, 4th book. I really enjoyed this series. Basically, the first book is called Akane, and the series overall is called the Madoran Chronicles. And in the first book, we follow this girl called Alex who's from our world, and she accidentally stumbles in through this doorway to another world, and it's called Medora. And there she starts attending a school, and it's a school for people who have magic, and everyone has their own magical abilities. So some people are able to turn invisible, some people are able to have like super strength, some people are able to have some kind of mind control. It's really cool. It's very reminiscent of Harry Potter, the way the adventure is structured and the way the friendships are as well, but it's still able to be its own thing, and I just have such fun reading this series. Honestly, all of these books I've read in a day. It's one of those books you sit down and read and just like zone out and you just indulge yourself. I love the thorough explanation Lynette Noni gives to everything. Like, I feel like she's just very good at going over everything and making sure there's no plot holes. One thing I will say, if you pick up this series, is I definitely think it's a series that you have to read basically back to back, because there are so many characters. It can be a little bit tricky to keep track of. I will also say I wish there were more female characters. Alex has a lot of male mentors and a lot of male friends, and she does have one close female friend, but I just wish there were more. And I also felt like this book was the boringest out of all of them so far. There was just not a lot going on in terms of plot. There was definitely a lot of foundation work getting done, because there is a collection of short stories after this, and then the next book is the final book. So there was obviously a lot of foundation getting built up for the final book. The other thing I really love about this series is how much training Alex gets. Like, it's so believable that she's able to become this powerful thinker, because each book we've given so much time to see Alex train and learn, and I've really enjoyed that. My final rating for this one was 3.25 stars. And read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I really enjoyed this. This book follows a girl by the name of Rosemary, and she was raised on Mars, and she is currently leaving Mars. She's about to start her employment on this ship known as the Wayfarer. The story just basically follows all the members of the Wayfarer, and a lot of them are from different cultures. There's a couple of humans and there's a couple of alien species that Becky Chambers has made up, and it's just about them and their interactions, and it's a lot of fun. Favorite character was definitely Six. Really loved how much attention to detail Becky Chambers must have done to create this world. She created so many different alien species, and she really went into depth of their cultures and their beliefs and their history. I really loved all the characters and their friendship. There's a lot of commentary on like our social customs and how they're kind of ridiculous, and Becky Chambers kind of makes fun of that, and it was really funny. I will say, if you are someone who hasn't read a lot of science fiction or fantasy, this might not be the book for you, especially if you're studying out, because there is a lot of terminology, there's a lot of world building, and I think it could go over your head and be a little bit too much. But I love the world building. I really love when the authors take the time to really create the world, and in great depth, which is what Becky Chambers has done. There wasn't really much of a plot in this, and I was kind of waiting half the book for something to happen until I realized that nothing was really going to happen. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and this is Becky Chambers' first book, I'm pretty sure, so that is incredible, and I can't wait to check out more of her work. Next book I managed to complete was a reread, and that was The Bromwich by Friendship. I absolutely adore this book. I adore this series. I'm currently in the middle of rereading the series because the final book came out a couple of months ago, and I want to reread and annotate the books thoroughly before I get to the final book. This story follows a girl named Tia, and she accidentally brings her brother back from the dead at his funeral, and from there she discovers she's a bone witch, and she's kind of taken into this society where people who have magic are trained. Really reminds me of the geisha. I've read Memoirs of the Geisha, and the way the whole training system is structured, this really reminded me of that. So Tia starts out working for this household, and she really works as a maid, and then once she's kind of accepted, she will then start officially training, and that's very similar to the geisha. Again, this is a slower paced book, so if you're not into slower paced books, you might not like this, but the world is so lush and I love it. When Tia brings her brother back from the dead, his name's Fox, he then becomes her familiar, so they have this like companionship, and they are able to not exactly read each other's minds, but they have a sense of one another. So if Tia's in danger, Fox can sense that, and come running to her. I really loved that Fox was so present. I feel like so often in fantasy stories, the protagonist discovers that they have a magical ability and they are sent off to train somewhere. Their family is left behind, but it was really nice that Fox was able to come with her. What is really cool about this book is it's actually told in a dual narrative. One narrative where we are following this chronicler. He has gone and found older Tia, who's 17 years old, and she's been exiled to this island. And you don't know why she's been exiled, but basically she's completely outcasted and considered evil in the society now. He goes and finds her, and then Tia's recounting her story to him. And so the other narrative is Tia's story of when she first discovers her power and is sent away from home and starts her training and everything. It's really, really, really great. It's very unique and I really, really love it and wish more people would check it out. And I gave those 4.5 stars. The next book I managed to complete was An Author's Odyssey, which is the 5th book in the Land of Stories series. I really enjoyed this series. It's a middle grade series that follows 2 twins. In the first book, they are transported into the fairy tale world through the fairy tale book, and they meet all the fairy tale characters. There's Goldilocks, and Goldilocks is an outlaw in this because she broke into the Three Bears house. There's Prince Charming, but there are multiple Prince Charmings in this book because you know how there's like one for Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, and they're all brothers. It's a lot of fun. It's really funny. It's so easy and quick to read. It's a middle grade. Can't really say too much because it is the second last book in a series. But if you are into middle grade, or if you want to get into middle grade, I think this is a really great place to start. I think it's a really creative way of doing retellings, and I really love seeing all the interactions between all the fairy tale characters that we grew up knowing. So I gave this 4 stars in the end. I then read Vicious. I cannot believe how long it took me to read this book. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I actually went onto my book depository account to check when I ordered this because I knew I've owned this for years, and I ordered this in August of 2014. I didn't realize that this had 2 timelines. I really like 2 timeline stories. One timeline, we follow Eli and Victor, and they are in university. They're both in the process of completing their thesis. Eli's thesis is on EOs, which stands for extraordinaries, and they decide to start doing experiments to see if extraordinaries are actually a thing. Extraordinaries are basically superheroes, so think like Marvel, Spider-Man, all of that. Second timeline, we follow Victor 10 years into the future, and you know that Victor and Eli are no longer friends and something went very, very wrong. So I don't want to say too much more. It's really, really great. I really enjoyed this. I can't wait to pick up Vengeful. I thought this was just such a well-crafted story, especially how the tension was built between the 2 timelines. I really enjoyed all the characters. Eli, Victor, Sydney, Mitch, they were all fantastic. The last book I managed to complete in June was The Windup Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. I don't know how to rate it or what I would give it, so I'm just not going to do it. I have very mixed feelings on this book. This book basically follows a 30-year-old man who has recently left his job because he was like unsatisfied with the work, and his cat's gone missing. And so his wife, they don't have children, it's just the 2 of them. His wife sends him off to go hunting for this cat, and she also enlists the help of some other people who are very kind of strange and have kind of a second sense that's like supposed to help find this cat. There's basically no plot to the story though. If you've never read Haruki Murakami, he writes like magical realism and his stories are very atmospheric, and he's got a very unique tone that is very much his own, and that is why he's such a well accomplished and praised writer. I had a lot of issues with this book. I didn't like the treatment of women. I didn't like how the magic in this book, or the, you know, it's magical realism, but I didn't like how the magic in this book ended up being or to do with the defiling of women. I also didn't like the lack of male characters. There is Toru, who's the main character, and then he has his wife, and then there are several of the women characters that he comes into contact with, And the other thing that Haruki Murakami often does is he will have his main characters, so in this case we have Toru, and he meets all these other characters, and they basically just come up to Toru and tell him their life story without him even asking. And the way that's done in this, it felt like an anthology collection rather than a complete novel. But there were a lot of female characters and not a lot of males. There was one old general who made like 2 appearances in the story. He really wasn't very present. And then there were 2 other male characters, and both of them were definitely villains, and I felt like Haruki Murakami crafted them as villains by the way they treated women. And one of them was a rapist and one of them was physically violent towards women. There is literally a passage in here where he describes that he was physically violent towards his wife because he had no one else to beat up and he was hers, so he just did it. It was really disgusting, and it kind of felt like Haruki Murakami was trying to make the distinction between these 2 characters and the main character Toru, and saying like Toru is a good guy because he doesn't rape women, he doesn't defile women, he doesn't use physical violence against women. And it was just very uncomfortable. There was also a really shocking scene in this where there was like a skin torture scene and someone was literally getting their skin peeled off them, and I have a pretty strong stomach, but that scene was really uncomfortable to read about. So if you're reading this book, be warned about that, because that definitely made me squirmish. There's a huge focus on women's bodies and their perception of sex. There really wasn't much to this, there really wasn't much plot, and I have to say I've read 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami, and these 2 books felt very similar. I also felt like there was no resolution to this book. It's clear there's a lot of literary merit to this book. He's very clever, I will say that, and he's a very talented writer, but I just did not like a lot of the content in this, and I just can't give it a rating. I just don't even know what to rate it. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. So those are all the books I managed to finish in June. Again, I'm really sorry this wrap up came so late, but let me know if you've read any of these and what you've thought of them. Let me know how your reading went in June, and I hope that you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and I'll see you next time. Bye!